Here we go. Here we go. Good noon, everyone out there. Hello, hello. Welcome to the webinar. We are in this period while we're just waiting for folks to come on in. Everyone's finishing their lunch or grabbing their lunch, and we're going to just give it a minute for people to come on. Hello, everyone. You know, the benefit of usually we do webinars where we don't have the cameras, but I get to look at all these good looking Mainers out here. So this is actually kind of nice. Hi, everyone. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to join. In the meantime, I love when people chat in where they are coming from. So whatever beautiful kitchen you're in, I see one right there, or outdoor patio space, please send it over from Portland, scenic Portland. Always got to be in there first. That's all right. Love to hear it. If you chat Orland, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Gorham in the house, all over. Richmond upon Kennebec. They should change it officially to that sort of UK style of Richmond on Kennebec. Camden. I'm in Cumberland in a basement. There we go. Nancy, you and I, Cumberland Strong. So again, we'll give it a couple more minutes, let folks come on. I see the counter ticking up as folks are joining, but welcome to the Maine Won't Wait Climate Council webinar. This is going to be fun. Harrison, Maine in the house. I used to be a counselor at a summer camp in Harrison, Maine. What a lovely place that is. Northport, Kennebunk. Good times. Good to see everyone. Here we go. Another couple minutes. Give me some more. Any Washington County folks? Any Washcos? Nobody calls it that. Blue Hill Peninsula, Hancock. That is close. Getting there. Getting down east, North Berwick. What a lovely day. I'm down here in my basement. Believe it or not, I'm not sitting in front of this still lake. Actually, nobody knows where this, we've asked before to try to figure out where my background is. Nobody knows. If anybody knows, I will give you a sticker. I'm in a basement. It's actually better these days to be in my basement where I can't see how beautiful it is out every single day. Looks like Moosehead. It does look like Moosehead. I could buy it. 12:03. We'll give it another minute. I still see the counter ticking up. We had good show of registrants today. Hope everyone is doing well. Does look like moving. No other guesses on the background here. Tiny island. There's a second tiny island, if that helps. Maybe not. One day we will track this down. We need that GeoGuessr guy from YouTube. I don't know if any folks know that, what I'm talking about. But it's 12:04. There are still some people trickling in, but I think we should get started. And now there's a big push of people coming in. Let me just wait one more minute. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, I am Nick Lund. I am the Advocacy and Outreach Manager for Maine Audubon, and I wanted to welcome you to this Maine Climate Council webinar. This crew of environmental groups in Maine have put on a bunch of these webinars, and I really enjoy doing them, working with these folks and sharing some great updates with all of you. So I'm going to get started here. I will talk about what we're doing. I will introduce our guests today, and then we will turn it over and start doing some learning. So the introduction is, as you may have heard, Maine's climate is changing. We've measured it in all kinds of ways, but we are working hard to respond. In 2019, Governor Mills and the Maine legislature created the Maine Climate Council, which is an assembly of scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan, local officials, and representatives from across the state to develop a 4-year plan to meet our climate goals, which is to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030 and at least 80% by 2050. There are several groups working on different aspects of the plan, working groups we call them, which went about developing recommendations for how we're going to meet these climate targets. They worked throughout 2019, 2020. Many of you joined us for presentations about that process. And in December of 2020, Maine released a plan called Maine Won't Wait, our climate action plan. It was a 4-year plan, and here we are in 2024, 4 years later. And so we are back at it. The groups now, thousands of folks across the state of Maine, are getting back together to review our progress on the plan so far. How are we doing in meeting our goals? And then developing either updated or new recommendations for how we're going to continue to get there. So that's what we're talking about right now. The working groups are back together. They are in the process now of having developed updated or new recommendations, and we want to share some of those with you and answer some of the questions that you might have about this process, and also let you know how you can help out in making sure that this plan is all that we want it to be. So with that, let me introduce the crew here with me. I am Nick Lund, as I said, the Advocacy and Outreach Manager for Maine Audubon. I am joined on the technical side. She said she didn't want to be on camera, but she's on it, and I'm glad she is. Maggie Summers, the Program and Outreach Manager for Maine Conservation Voters. Hi, Maggie. I will say too, well, I'll get to that in a minute, some of the technical stuff that Maggie's going to help out with. She is joined by her colleague, Kathleen Neal, Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships with Maine Conservation Voters. Kathleen has been with us since the very first of these webinars, and we love having her. Thank you so much. And then we have experts from two working groups. So we are highlighting two of the working groups working on the updated climate action plan. This time around, we are highlighting the energy working group, number one. And from that group, we are honored to have Mr. Jack Shapiro, the Climate and Clean Energy Program Director for the Natural Resources Council of Maine, NRCM. That's our logo down there. Hey, Jack. And Steve Clemmer, Director of Energy Research and Analysis for the Union of Concerned Scientists. Hello. That is the energy working group. From the Natural and Working Lands working group, we are honored to be joined by Karen Tilburg, the President and CEO of the Forest Society of Maine. Hello, Karen. Welcome. And all right, we're going to get started in just a second. A few little tech things. We are recording right now, and so don't worry about it. If you go get lunch or miss anything, it'll be up on various websites. You'll probably receive emails from whichever group you're registered with later on. Questions will be taken at the end. What we'd like you to do for the questions is chat them. You see the chat function down at the bottom of your page. You can chat them. Maggie and I will take them, and we will keep them until the very end. So you can ask them at any time, and we'll save them for the end. Please keep yourself muted. I don't think you have the ability to unmute yourself, but if you do, please don't, because it just is easier for everyone to keep it to the speakers. So we're ready to go, and the first order of business is I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to give a refresher on who we are, what we're doing here, how the plan is going, things like that. Kathleen, thank you.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We were remembering as we were preparing this morning that we've done 6 or 7 of these, lots of organizations working together to share updates on the climate action plan, and you all keep showing up, so thank you. We really enjoy it. What you see on the screen right here is not a surprise to anybody who's on this call, right? We're already seeing impacts from climate change. One of the things that has distinguished this process that we're going through together as a state from the very beginning is the attention to good, solid scientific detail. So you can see in tiny little letters down at the end, at the bottom of that slide, that this data comes from the Science and Technical Subcommittee. And we're going to share a link to that report so that you can dig into all of the science yourselves. But the highlights are not going to surprise you. We have had the past 4 years have been among the 10 warmest on record. We're seeing more precipitation. Winter is 2 weeks shorter than it used to be. It's not just your imagination. And this is the one that really blows my mind. Sea levels are 8 inches higher than they were a century ago. The urgency is pretty clear. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. Well, when Governor Mills was elected and took office in 2019, Maine really hadn't seen meaningful climate action in 8 years, right? Previous governor was a climate denier. We didn't see the progress we needed to see. And as soon as Governor Mills stepped into office, we started to quickly change that trajectory. The Climate Council was established in 2019 with all of those bold statutory targets that Nick mentioned. The 45% emissions reductions by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Carbon neutrality by 2045. And what's really important about these goals is they are actually in state law. The state is legally obligated to hit those numbers. So it really matters how we do it. We've got to figure it out. The Climate Council is the entity that came together to work on that, to figure out how we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, make our communities more resilient, increase economic opportunity, and do it all with an equity lens. It took a whole of government approach. We had more than 250 scientists and industry leaders and state and local officials and people like you and advocates like us working across these 6 working groups, 2 subcommittees, and 2 cross-cutting issue groups, one focused on materials management and one on land use. In addition to the work of these groups, which is countless meetings and conversations, the full Climate Council has been meeting quarterly since 2019, and hundreds of members of the public, you guys, have been a part of that. So thank you very much. So where has it gotten us? Let's take a look at where we are. On December 1st, 2020, Maine Won't Wait was delivered to the legislature. This is a plan that has won awards and gotten a lot of attention and recognition for being ambitious and actionable. And a plan doesn't do any of us any good if it sits on the shelf. So implementation began immediately. When we talk about implementation of a plan like Maine Won't Wait, we're talking about a couple of things. Legislation is the first big bucket. We saw laws passed and signed into statute to establish efficiency standards for appliances. That was a direct recommendation of Maine Won't Wait. To put targets for battery storage of renewable energy into statute. To incorporate sea level rise projections into our state laws and rules, and dozens and dozens of other pieces of legislation that directly tie back to Maine Won't Wait. Implementation also means administrative action, right? So it means charging our state agencies with developing really clear plans. Plans that start plans that start plans. It starts to sound like a lot of work and organization, and it matters, right? So the governor's energy office is working on a pathway to 2040 that really outlines how are we going to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. Administrative action also includes a new climate science information exchange to make sure that everything we do as a state is guided by the best science and up-to-date technological information. It includes looking at state government and how it's set up and restructuring the community planning services that have existed across different state agencies and putting them into a one-stop shop, the Maine Office of Community Affairs, to make it really easy for local residents and leaders to get what they need from state government. Speaking of community action, there is now a thriving community resilience partnership program that's directly serving more than 175 cities and towns and tribal governments across Maine. We are all in this together. And of course, the work we do matters for the relationships that we build and the process that we go through, the conversations that we have, but the results matter too. Actually, Maggie, go back one more second. We've got to hold ourselves accountable, right? And you'll see at the bottom of here a little clip of the Maine Won't Wait dashboard. We'll share out a link to that. If you haven't spent some time on this dashboard, you are in for a treat because it is sort of the working space of all of the climate action work we're doing. You can flip through the climate action plan itself. You can dig into the climate science dashboard and look at the graphs of land and ocean temperature trends and sea level rise yourself. There are action guides that can help you say, all right, this is going to be the year that I really invest in energy efficiency at home. How do I do that? There's a guide for that right on the dashboard. There are also stories from people and businesses and organizations and communities across the state. So you can get a little bit of inspiration and see exactly how this work comes together. Really, I cannot recommend that dashboard enough. It also has all of the targets that were included in Maine Won't Wait and the associated plans and trackers to see how close we are to hitting them. All of that only gets us halfway through this timeline so far. Just about a year ago, we started figuring out what's next, right? We still have the same core problem, climate change. We have made a tremendous amount of progress in the last 4 years, which means we've checked some things off our list, and we have discovered new things that are getting added to our list, some new challenges. There's a greater focus through this second round of Maine Won't Wait on implementation. How do we actually get there? And how do we do it in a way that brings everybody along, right? How do we make sure that equity is a huge part of the work we do together? Of course, the landscape outside of Maine is completely different too. 4 years ago, when we were developing the original Maine Won't Wait, we did not have a federal government that was right there with us on climate action. That has changed, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed 2 years ago as the greatest, largest investment in climate action in history, created a whole new suite of resources and programs and investments to help us reach these goals. So here we are. It's September 2024. We have a draft of the climate action plan. We have a whole bunch of recommendations. We've got a few more months to pull it all together before the updated plan is delivered to the legislature. And you're here too. So let's take a look at what's in there. All right. We have got a good set of climate action strategies to guide our work in the next 4 years, the way Maine Won't Wait has guided us so far. I'm going to guess I might not be the only one on this call with a couple of copies of Maine Won't Wait within reach of my desk, but just in case I am, let me tell you, this list is not markedly different. It looks a lot like the list of strategies in Maine Won't Wait 1.0. We know we still need to embrace the future of transportation in Maine. This is a really challenging sector. It's responsible for 49% of our emissions in the state. And we've got a two-pronged approach to change that trajectory. One is more electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure we need to support them. And one is more public, active, and shared transportation, all with the overarching goal of getting people where they need to go in a way that is clean and affordable. Same story for the second strategy you see here. Modernize Maine's buildings. That's exactly what we said in the 2020 version, but we've got new targets here. We blew right past some really ambitious goals around heat pump deployment, and we have new targets for this next round. Again, we're really focused in this section on ensuring equitable access to housing and energy efficiency programs. In the transition to clean energy, these recommendations really focus on managing that transition with in a way that ensures reliability and affordability. And I'm so glad that Jack and Steve are here to give us a peek into the weeds of what that's going to look like. On the strategy to create jobs and grow Maine's economy through climate action, that is all about the education and training and investments that we need to grow a skilled clean energy and energy efficiency workforce, and to retain and create jobs in Maine's natural resource industries. You'll see a lot more detail in the title of Strategy E. In Maine Won't Wait, it just says protect Maine's environment. But here we've got protect the environment in Maine and our working lands and waters, increase the resilience of coastal, marine, and inland habitats. If that sounds like a mouthful, it's because this work is big, and this strategy really reflects a holistic approach. It makes room to incorporate some new recommendations in materials management that we didn't touch on 4 years ago. But we have so many opportunities to go deeper, and I'm really glad Karen is with us to dive deep into the natural and working lands recommendations. Here's one where the title got shorter and the task got bigger. 4 years ago, we talked about separate strategies to build healthy and resilient communities and to invest in climate-ready infrastructure. It is all rolled into one. That is because our communities won't be healthy and resilient without climate-ready infrastructure. We all learned that, if we didn't already know it, in those massive storms last winter. This strategy F includes recommendations about growing Maine's circular economy and using our making land use recommendations that reflect smart growth principles, focusing on resilient infrastructure, but also on our own resilience. For the first time, Maine Won't Wait will go deep on the mental health impacts of climate changes. We are in this together, and it is hard work, but we're engaging with each other and with all of our communities, and there is so much for us to accomplish together. So how can you get involved? Don't worry, it is not too late. A tremendous amount of work has been done. We will share some resources so you can review what the working groups have come up with. But also, we want to hear from you, and the state wants to hear from you. You'll see on the screen here the last 3 in a series of public meetings. I'm going to be at the one in Bangor tomorrow night. There's also one in Ellsworth and one in Biddeford. And if that is too much of a hike or a commitment, you can pull up your phone right now, point it at the screen, and that QR code will take you to a set of surveys. Maybe don't fill them out right now, because we've got some really interesting things to share with you, including some tips and information that might give you some ideas about what you want to say in those survey responses. And I have a feeling you're going to get an email later this afternoon with a link to this recording, as well as some guidance about those surveys and a link. So if you didn't do the QR code thing, don't worry, we'll get you the information. I think that is where I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to hand it back to Nick to tell us what's next.
There we go. Thank you, Kathleen. That was fantastic. As always, I appreciate your help. And we're going to keep digging in here. So there are 6 working groups on the Maine Climate Council. And today we are highlighting 2 of those. Last time around, for webinar attendees, we highlighted the Transportation Working Group. There's also Community Resilience, Coastal and Marine, Buildings, Infrastructure, and Housing. But today we are focusing on 2, the Energy Working Group and the Natural and Working Lands Working Group. And to start with the Energy Working Group, I will turn it over to Jack Shapiro from the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and to Steve Clemmer from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. And thanks everyone for being here today. So here at NRCM, we have been around for more than 60 years here in Maine, and our mission is to protect, conserve, and restore Maine's environment. And right now, today, climate is one of the biggest threats to all of those goals, which is why it's such an important priority for our organization and for me. And energy, specifically electricity and the power sector, is really the linchpin of Maine's climate strategy of electrification and renewables. And it's a strategy that is embodied in the first Maine Won't Wait, but it's also embodied in some of these major pieces of federal climate legislation that have come through during the Biden-Harris administration, like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So this is all about moving away from fossil fuels in transportation, in buildings, in industry, in power generation, because it's burning fossil fuels that creates the carbon pollution that causes climate change. And we need to support that electrification with lots of new renewable energy sources, as well as ensuring our electric grid is ready to support this transition and to do it in an affordable way. So we've made a lot of progress on this since the first climate action plan, since the in the past 5 years or so. This is just a sample of some of the high-level policies that have moved forward in that time. But we've expanded our renewable portfolio standard. That's sort of the amount of our energy that needs to come from renewables. We've significantly grown solar in Maine. And if you want to look at some specific numbers, that dashboard that Kathleen mentioned has a lot of more detail about some of these specifics around both this and heat pumps and EVs and all kinds of stuff. We've set strong goals for energy storage and offshore wind. Just had a big announcement from the federal government today about offshore wind leasing coming next month to the Gulf of Maine. And some of these policies have already had real benefits. Just for the renewable portfolio standard, a recent report found that Maine's RPS has saved ratepayers more than $21 million a year since 2011 and has driven more than $1 billion in both direct investment and in operations and maintenance spending in the state, and supports more than 1,000 jobs here in Maine in our clean energy industry. So this slide here isn't a comprehensive list. A couple other things that are really important include instituting a comprehensive grid planning process to align how our utilities plan with Maine's climate and clean energy goals. It's remarkable that that wasn't required until a couple years ago, but that's something we were able to put in place. Establishing a green bank to help Maine homeowners and businesses invest in efficiency, electrification, and renewables. And the Green Bank just recently received $15 million from the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was created by the Inflation Reduction Act. And 40% of that funding is earmarked for low-income and disadvantaged communities. So all of this progress was the context for our work on the Energy Working Group this time. You can go to the next slide. Overall, we feel that the recommendations, the draft recommendations to the Climate Council are really strong and get at the biggest priority areas of action. And so with that, I'll sort of jump into the first of the recommendations, which is to decrease energy burdens for Mainers. Energy costs are a really important concern for everyone in Maine, families, businesses, everybody. And any conversation about energy costs, this has become really politicized. Any conversation about energy costs has to start with an honest look at what are the drivers of those high energy costs. And the number one driver of high energy costs in Maine is our overdependence on fossil fuels. They're volatile, they're driven by global markets and global events like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Just an example is in 2022, average electricity supply bills went up by $30 a month because of high natural gas prices in New England, because of global markets and the turmoil caused by the war in Ukraine. They then jumped by $30 a month on average again the following year. So when people are experiencing these rising bills, it's really important to put a finger on what is actually causing that. Because those global markets also affect prices at the gas pump when those go up, prices in heating oil when those go up, compounded with sort of extra demand in the winter. Now, clean energy technologies, on the other hand, as a rule, reduce costs for consumers. And now there are both these state incentives through Efficiency Maine and federal incentives put in place by the Inflation Reduction Act and other federal climate legislation. But this is a really crucial issue to stay on top of, which is why it was the #1 recommendation out of this group. And you can go to the next slide. Because really, by the numbers, Maine's energy burdens are really high. Generally, in sort of the energy policy world, it's considered, a household is considered to have a high energy burden if they spend more than 6% of their income on energy. And according to the last comprehensive report we have from 2019, that's about the average of what our energy burdens are in Maine. And for low income customers, it can be 18, 19%. So it's a really crucial issue for us to work on. And again, and you can go to the next slide, to a significant degree, it's fossil fuel dependence that are driving these burdens. You can see here, it's households that heat with fossil fuels tend to have higher energy burdens. But even those who heat with electricity have burdens that are too high, which is why this is this core recommendation from the Energy Working Group this year. So as we talked about, renewable energy our RPS has lowered rates. Electrification of heating, heat pumps are generally more affordable to operate than heating with oil or other fossil fuels. Electrifying transportation can reduce fuel costs. Effective grid planning can reduce the growth in grid costs. That can all play a role. So lots of work to do here and on the other recommendations. And so to talk about that a little bit more, I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Steve Clemmer from the Union of Concerned Scientists, to talk about some of those other recommendations. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jack, and hello to everyone. It's great to be here. So yeah, the second priority recommendation that came out of the Energy Working Group is sort of a big picture umbrella policy that would accelerate Maine's clean electricity targets to 100% by 2040. The law that Jack mentioned before, the RPS, has a target of 100% by 2050. But as Jack so eloquently explained, that the electricity sector is the linchpin of getting to our carbon reduction targets. So having the electricity sector go earlier so that there's clean electricity for our heat pumps, for our electric vehicles, and other uses of electricity to replace fossil fuels is absolutely critical. So this umbrella policy, which Governor Mills announced in 2023, announced this goal. There's really several important elements to getting there that we need to implement. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to highlight a few. Establishing clean energy procurements to occur every 2 years is absolutely critical. We have procurements for the renewable standard, for offshore wind and storage that Jack mentioned, that are moving forward. In fact, a couple of days ago, the Maine Public Utility Commission issued a request for proposals for new renewable energy projects that would produce about 13% of Maine's electricity use. And there's a requirement that those projects reduce electricity costs for consumers like they have in the past, as Jack explained. Secondly, the grid planning activities, so that Jack mentioned as well. This really came out of a recommendation from the 2020 Climate Action Plan about creating a comprehensive holistic planning process. Well, in July, the Public Utility Commission issued a final order launching an 18-month grid planning process for Central Maine Power and Versant, and there's going to be future opportunities for stakeholder engagement in that process, so stay tuned for that. Another one to highlight here is implementation of Maine's offshore wind roadmap. And this really includes several different elements. One is designing the procurement process. Another is building a port and a skilled labor force, developing a research array, which is moving forward. There's some transmission planning that needs to occur, regional coordination and cost sharing with other states that are pursuing offshore wind is another piece of that as well. Next slide, please. So Kathleen had mentioned earlier the pathways to 2040 analysis. This just shows a projection that's included in the draft results from that study that the Governor's Energy Office commissioned. And the study hasn't been released yet, but we're expecting it to come out any day now. This graph shows the projected electricity generation in Maine from achieving those 100% by 2040 targets. And a couple of key points just to highlight here. One is that you can see that the overall amount of generation over time roughly triples by 2040. And that's due to the increased demand from electrification in transportation, buildings, and industry primarily. You can also notice that in that blue area there, that's the offshore wind target of 3,000 megawatts. That really plays a big role in achieving Maine's targets, and that's why it's so important that we move forward with offshore wind. But you can also see in the yellow and the gray areas that onshore wind as well as solar also needs to grow pretty significantly. And then finally, we see thermal generation, which is really natural gas and oil generation that is used in Maine, pretty much has to go to almost zero and be replaced with other low carbon fuels for the little bit that remains. And that combined with hydro and biomass really stay kind of fixed over time at current levels. They don't go up. Those are useful in helping to integrate wind and solar into the system over these longer time frames. Along with energy storage. Energy storage is not shown on this graph because it's generation, but energy storage also is incredibly important as part of this study. Next slide, please. The third important recommendation that came out of the Energy Working Group was to develop and implement demand management and innovative load flexibility strategies. Now, this is kind of a wonky topic, so let me give you a couple examples of what we mean by this. So this would include things like charging your electric vehicle during off-peak hours or when there's excess solar generation on the grid, and using that electricity during times when the electricity use is high, either from the batteries themselves or even from electricity storage, other storages on the system. Another is using grid integrated devices that can shift your electric water heating to off-peak hours, and as well as providing incentives to larger industrial and commercial customers to reduce their electricity use during peak hours. And the good news here is that Efficiency Maine actually has some programs in place that help do this. And so this strategy is really to build on those programs, to make them more available, to adopt the latest and greatest software and other technologies that can help manage supply and demand, as well as facilitating more participation that includes low-income and disadvantaged communities participating in these programs where they can actually save money as well. Next slide. And this again comes from the Pathways to 2040 study and really shows the importance of this. The graph on the right shows that with just a medium level of demand flexibility and demand management, load flexibility, we can reduce the amount of new capacity that we need by about 25%. That helps reduce the need for new infrastructure, new clean energy deployment, as well as transmission lines and other things that would go along with that. And it can also have a significant impact in reducing overall system costs while improving reliability and resilience of the electricity system. So I'm going to stop there and I'll pass it back to Nick. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jack. A lot of work going on in the energy sector. Thanks so much for all your input. Just a quick reminder, we're going to save time at the end for questions. I've seen a lot of good ones come in. If you have them, please put them in the chat. Maggie is doing a great job of collecting them, and we will get to them later. So we can do that at any time. And now let me pass it over to Karen Tilburg, who will talk about the Natural and Working Lands Working Group. Karen.
Thank you, Nick, and thank all of you for attending today. The Natural and Working Lands sector of the Maine Climate Action Plan is very near and dear to my heart. I work for the Forest Society of Maine. We're a statewide land trust focusing on conservation of Maine's forests. And forests, as I think many of you are aware, are critically important part of natural climate change solutions by sequestering and storing upwards of 70% of the greenhouse gases emitted every year. And so holding on to our forests is a part of this entire effort. And I was fortunate to have served on the initial Natural and Working Lands group and did so again this year. Participated in the subgroups. There were 3 subgroups of the Natural and Working Lands group. And I'll try to bring to this conversation some of the nature of our discussions, the science behind it, and the hard work that are in these recommendations. I want to give thanks to those who were involved in these subgroups. It was a great effort by many people from different perspectives. And we had a great facilitator as well, Jody Sapphire. You may remember that the original Working Lands recommendation was to establish and to increase by 2030 the total acreage of conserved lands in the state to 30% through voluntary focused purchases of land and working forest or farm conservation easements. And it was in making that recommendation, there was a strong urge to reach out and work with stakeholders to develop specific elements of how to do that. How do we get to 30% by 2030? And also an encouragement to focus conservation on high biodiversity areas to support land and water connectivity and ecosystem health. So I would summarize the work we did at the Natural and Working Lands group this year, really to try to tease out how do we go about doing this and what are the realities of 30% by 2030. I guess I'd start by recognizing that Maine is fortunate to basically have conserved about almost 23% of the state. And that we've been averaging about 50,000 acres per year, by everyone together. However, to reach the 30% goal by 2030, that number of acres per year would have to increase fivefold. So that's a stiff challenge and a hard goal. And so this subgroup really spent some time thinking about this. Next slide, please. So first of all, we did spend some time talking about what do we mean by conserved lands. Conserved lands, according in our subgroup, means any natural and working land that is durably protected and provides natural resource-based benefits. These benefits can include clean water, healthy soils, habitat for diverse and thriving populations of plants and wildlife, food security, climate resiliency, carbon storage, and cultural, economic, and outdoor recreational opportunities for all Maine people. We focused on this and came up with this as a definition, recognizing that there's some important current use tax programs, such as tree growth or open space, and some other kinds of programs that encourage landowners to hold on to their natural and working lands, but that they're not durably protected. And I think the group also recognized that tribal lands and tribal interests in land are an important part of any future discussion. And that has been identified as a critical step moving forward between government to government discussions and planning. Next slide, please. So the recommendation one was focus land protection as we move forward here in areas with high biodiversity value, high carbon storage and sequestration, cultural and economic importance, or which offer opportunities to improve public access equitably. And the goal really is to try to get to 1.5 million acres by December 2030 with these priorities in mind. Next slide, please. And so as we think about this, we want to focus on purchases of land and easements as tools to do this, and have really set 1.5 as a doable goal if paired with the other recommendations, which I'll mention in a minute, of adequate capacity and funding. The importance of this work is to focus in terms of the high biodiversity and connectivity goals, is to draw from existing scientific and agency work, such as beginning with habitat focus areas of statewide ecological significance, and then also for the state and private NGO efforts to try to acquire more ecological reserves, including high carbon forests, and to really think about landscape connectivity as identified possibly through a new statewide landscape conservation blueprint that is also a recommendation coming out of this group. However, as we do this work, it was very important to the group, and public input was important to this as well, to be thinking about equitable access and use of conserved lands, especially by marginalized communities. And so as we're thinking about, conservation and high biodiversity areas and connectivity, are there areas that might be near to urban centers where people may not have cars or transportation to travel far distances? Are there ways that we can be thinking about our conservation to enable people to get to lakes and to cool off and swim, even if they don't have the ability or means to have a camp on a lake? And to be thinking about just the basics of access to the out of doors as we're conserving the out of doors. And then to continue to be mindful of the importance of cultural resources and work with our tribal partners and others, and as we're planning for conservation, to be thinking about equity and from their perspective, as well as economic and recreational opportunities for all people. And then in terms of sort of more basic working forest conservation easement, the goal here is well distributed, so that again, we're looking at the importance of forests for carbon storage and sequestration, and that this is a basic fact that they are very important to us, along with their many other values to our for economic and recreation. They're storing and sequestering a lot of carbon. But to be looking at distributing our conservation of them across the landscape, thinking about drinking water, watersheds, and ensuring water quality as we do so. Next slide, please. A recommendation 2 focused on farmland. I was not on, there was a subgroup that focused on the farmland, but the importance here really jumped out to all of us, that farmland protection and conservation is lagged behind our more general conservation in Maine. And so the recommendation here is to safeguard the state's agricultural resources by doubling the permanently protected farmland in Maine by 2030 through a comprehensive and collaborative strategy that brings increased state funding, capacity, and new strategies to this work. And I think really behind this is the recognition that there needs to be a well-funded, sufficiently staffed, stand-alone state program or mechanism, in addition to the Land for Maine's Future program, that would be focused on farmland conservation, and that this would be done in collaboration with nonprofit and federal partners, and would include both traditional easement acquisition as well as possible alternative methods of protecting farmland, and that this would be made to be a more seamless and flowing kind of program to be able to respond to needs and opportunities. There was also a call for a commission to commission a Maine Farmland Action Plan, and that would be also to look at areas of highest priority to secure against non-agricultural development, along with affordable and achievable pathways to farmland access and development. And then to expand funding for state programming and infrastructure, such as grant, loan, and assistance programs that can really make a farmland ownership more viable. Next slide, please. And this, I'm sorry, I should have asked you to move sooner, but this is really the more detailed metric for the farmland goal. And this involves annually investing 20 million in the state funding toward the permanent conservation of Maine's farmland and protecting at least 7% of the state's presently undeveloped farmland by 2030. And so those are key parts. Recommendation 3 is very significant. It's funding for all of this work. And the goal of the group here, the recommendation, is to significantly expand the funding and funding eligibility for fee and easement programs through existing and new land conservation programs such as Land for Maine Future program. Next slide, please. And the more specific metric here is to establish by December 2025 a permanent conservation funding that will generate at least $50 million per year. And that's in addition to the farmland, which we just discussed. So this is a very significant part of the recommendation coming out of the Natural and Working Lands group. Next slide, please. In addition to the funding is the capacity. And doing conservation with all of the goals and priorities we've described really requires planning. There's a lot of transactional work done by land use planners, lawyers, appraisals, due diligence, environmental assessments, and then the ongoing land management and monitoring of fee and easement. It's all costs some money and it takes people. And so to be realistic about our goals, we have to be realistic about the capacity that we have to do this work. And so the recommendation here talks about the importance of really looking at that capacity need. Next slide, please. And so we set a metric for this as well, to increase the conservation, acquisition, and stewardship staff of land management agencies in proportion to the acreage of land owned under easement and other legal stewardship responsibilities, and to develop a plan for long-term land uses for the state of Maine. And this applies to all of our state agencies that are involved in owning land, managing land, and working towards meeting this goal. So it's a very significant one. Next slide, please. There was also a forest carbon subgroup that I served on, and this was also a very meaningful and important discussion as we talk about forests and the importance of holding on to forests and the hard work they do to sequester and store carbon. There's recognition that providing incentives to forest landowners, foresters, and loggers can to aid in the implementation of climate-friendly practices in terms of how forests are managed, how they're harvested, and the whole approach to and chain of actions regarding our forests can make a difference and can actually help increase the sequestration and storage of carbon in our forests. And so a lot of thought and time was given to this topic, and Maine Forest Service was tagged with really looking at programs and incentives that could be available for all of these parts of our forest management and forest ownership chain of actions. There was also related to that the goal of increasing the availability of technical assistance, training, and education to increase the application of climate-friendly practices. And this is important because there's a changing climate out there, and there's changing conditions in the forests. The number of days where there's wetter soils are changing. The number of days when there's no ice or frozen ground is changing, and the kinds of practices that loggers and foresters and managers have to be mindful of is changing. And so to continue to bring good knowledge and good training is vital for our health of our forests, and for also continuing to benefit climate, the ability of our forests to sequester and store carbon. I should say that under these rubric of these was a goal to try to update our Maine open space program to provide and incorporate incentives for forest owners to adopt climate-friendly land management practices. There was a bill in the legislature last year that almost made it across the finish line. It didn't quite, but that could provide landowners that are involved and enrolled in open space to employ and implement a climate-friendly management strategies and benefit in terms of their tax, the property tax, if they make these commitments over time. And then also the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry and Bureau of Parks and Land, Maine Forest Service are really tagged with staying on top of a lot of changing options and programs and potential carbon forest offset sales, to be a source of information for landowners, so that landowners can go and find out what's out there, and for programs that can help provide incentives with carbon offset sales or other similar programs. So it's a vital area, it's a changing area, and I think the group worked very hard to recognize that data monitoring and verification is going to be playing a role here, because we have a sense of what the data is and what's climate smart forestry, but to continue to monitor that and verify it to support good policy is going to be important. So those were the recommendations coming out of that group.
Karen, thank you so much.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot there, and there's a lot there for every working group. And we are pushing against the time. Let me just wrap up with a few last action steps, and then we'll try to get to questions if we have time for them. Again, you will be receiving some emails from the folks you registered through, whatever organization that is, with more information about the recording, the surveys that you can take. We highly encourage everyone to take these surveys. It's very important for the Climate Council to hear feedback from everybody. There are these listening sessions that are listed here in Bangor, Ellsworth, and Biddeford. And then we are all here for you to help out with any questions you have. So please reach out. And maybe, Maggie, if you go to that last slide with the CR code, there you go. You can get to the surveys right there. I want to try to jump into a few questions while we still have time. Thanks for everyone for joining us, and thanks to all the panelists for here. We can answer some more questions later, but I guess, Jack, there was one question about some news today in the offshore wind space. I wanted you to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So the news we got this morning was that, after about 5 years of work in engagement and data crunching and multiple rounds of feedback, we heard today that the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, it's a part of the Department of Interior, has scheduled their lease sale out in the Gulf of Maine for a number of areas for developers to bid on to build floating offshore wind projects out in the Gulf of Maine. So this is really exciting because we need a lot of new renewable energy to support our goals and electrification here in Maine. And we have a world-class offshore wind resource off our coast out there in the Gulf. As NRCM and many other environmental groups in Maine have been working on for a long time, offshore wind not only is this sort of key facet of our work on climate and clean energy, but it's also this enormous economic development opportunity to be able to build a new industry that sort of honors our maritime and shipbuilding traditions here in Maine, can really have a huge impact. So this lease sale will actually have actual developers who are interested in building these projects, and we'll start to see really specific plans start to come through the federal process, which is very extensive. Many of our groups will be involved in those to make sure that these projects are developed responsibly, with the sort of highest standards for equity and for job quality, for how they think about impacts to the ecosystem and wildlife and all of these things too. So it's a really exciting step forward in this really important element for our climate and clean energy plans.
Thank you, Jack, very much. We saw how important the development of offshore wind is to meeting our climate goals. There's a lot, folks have a lot of questions. There's a lot of complicated things happening in the world. There's a lot of disinformation out there being spread from fossil fuel companies, among others. So getting some good information is really important. The organizations on this call and others are there to provide that. Check our websites for additional events or other information coming up. I'm going to try to get to a few more questions, and I'm sorry I'm going quick, but Kathleen, we had talked about a question about residential heating and power outages. You want to talk about that?
Boy, does anybody on this call have experience with a power outage in the winter? Gosh, you'd think we did. Well, my first tip would be talk to your friends and neighbors, because there are a lot of folks out there who have already made this switch and already have fully electrified heating at home. There are also folks who also don't have heat when the power goes out, because oil and propane fired boilers also need electricity to run. But the buildings working group, which I actually had the honor to co-chair, spent a lot of time talking about this. And one of the key takeaways that it's important for everybody to understand is that the more we invest in energy efficiency, insulation, air sealing, all of those good things, that actually the longer your home will be comfortable in the event of a power outage. So that is a great example of the way that we're trying to advance a really holistic approach here. Yes, we want clean energy. We also want homes that are comfortable even when the power is out. So great question. And I think this plan has an answer for you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think we'll do one more question. We'll try to answer additional questions via email. I had a question for Karen about the 30% conserved Maine. Does that, you had a 1.5 million acres in number in your slides. Is that 30%, or how much more do we need to do to get to that 30%?
So we're at a little under 23%. Maine's about 20 million acres. So I actually need to do the math, but the 1.5 brings us very closer to the 30%. And it isn't exactly there, but we thought, based on what we have been doing collectively, again, it's a number of efforts across the state with the state aid as well, that the 1.5 can bring us there. So it isn't the full 30%, but it is seen as an important milestone that is doable given what we've been able to do and with additional funding.
Thank you very much. And I think to be respectful of time, we're going to have to close it there. I want to thank everyone for joining here. I want to thank Maggie, especially from NBCV, who's doing lots of work behind the scenes. I want to thank Karen and Steve and Jack and Kathleen and all of you out there. Have a great day. Thanks for your attention, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.